Thank you, Linda, and welcome everyone to the second of three sessions for Rochester's first ever Disability Summit. If you missed the last one, that was recorded just last Wednesday as part of the Equity series, so you'll be able to still watch that and tune in if you're interested. But just as a quick recap, this grew out of the idea of trying to make this an educational opportunity to learn more about accessibility and people with disabilities within Rochester and where we can go from here. Also, so many groups help to make this a reality and to make this a thing that we hope to do every year. The Recent Time Quality Council, SEMSIL, Workforce Development, Ability Building Community, the City of Rochester, all of us coming together to try to make this an opportunity to be able to understand how issues affect people with disabilities within our community and then where we can go from here. So for today, we're going to kind of go back to that theme of how people are experts on their own lived experience and how this is an opportunity to learn from them. So we have a lived experience. Today is more about learning about lived experience and getting a panel of folks to be able to speak to that. So with that, I will hand it over to Lexi Dunn, both for an accessibility check and also to introduce our panelists, as she's our moderator for today.
My name is Alexi. I will be the moderator for today's panel. So before we get started, I just want to go ahead and do an accessibility statement. So go ahead and take care of your needs in any way that you need to, whether that's going out to get a drink, getting a snack, taking a brain break, playing with a fidget toy like me, just doing whatever helps to meet your needs. I understand that everyone's needs are different, and nonetheless, every way of participation is completely valid. So, with that being said, I also want to acknowledge the fact that being on this panel for all of us is something that's really vulnerable. We're going to be talking a lot about personal topics, and I just want to make sure that we know that this is a very unique panel in the fact that, yes, it's okay to ask questions that are very personal and deep in this room. But if I were to see you at the grocery store and you asked me, Lexi, how do you deal with the crushing weight of ableism? That's probably not the place to ask me that. So let's keep that in mind. Also, understand that disability is completely different for everyone that experiences it. Even people that have the same diagnosis can have two completely different lived experiences. So, with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to my panelists, and we're going to share a little bit about our background and why we're here so that we can learn a little bit about each of them. So, I'm going to start with Shelly.
Thank you, Lexi. Hello, everyone. I'm Sally Rowley. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a 50-something white woman with reddish fading hair and a white shirt. I have been both in front of or working with people with disabilities and a disabled person now myself. So I started this life as one of four daughters to a couple that live in Zimbrona. So I considered Rochester my home or the big city close to my home. And I went to the University of Minnesota for college and quickly learned how big it was. So I transferred back to RCTC to figure out my life. And there is where I started working at Hiawatha Adult Home. So I worked with on the gold unit, they called it. So I had 11 people there. And it was an ICF. So it was right during the 90s when they signed the ADA, which if you are in the disability world, ADA stands for Americans with Disabilities Act. And I worked with them in the field for years. I ended up transferring to Hamlin. And I worked at Garvin, but further up I got on the ladder to program director, etc., the further away from the people I got. So I thought I would go into the school system to work with kids and be able to have some effect on the youth. And I worked in an EBD classroom. EBD is short for emotional and behavioral disturbed. And I worked in the EBD classroom for 1 year. And when school let out that year, I ended up working at the Guthrie part-time for extra money, and they asked me to work with them full-time. And from there, I called the acting bug, went to LA, started acting, and very quickly learned I hated acting. So I ended up in casting, and it was when I was casting the first movie I ever had as a casting director. I ended up having a seizure and finding out that I had brain tumors. So I had to reassess my life, and I moved back to the area in 2011. And in 2012, I had a brainstem tumor rupture, and I ended up using a wheelchair, and I've got a lot of different multiple disabilities that affect different parts of my life. I have a speech disability, probably tell. Obviously, the mobility disability. I also have acquired brain injury, which causes dysarthria, which is that disorder that can't find words, the right words sometimes, and that makes me have to speak around the issue sometimes. So we'll probably get to basking at some point, but I'll let other people have a turn at the mic. Jody.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Jody Albert. I'm a white woman, and I'm honored to be here with everybody, both on Zoom and with the panel and the guests in the room. Thank you so much. I have started out with a disability when I was 9, my first brain injury. I was able to accomplish getting a job, my career, working in the service provider field. 3.5 years ago, I fell on the ice and acquired another brain injury. That morning, I was able to walk, talk, and process information. That afternoon, all that changed. I was not able to process the information any longer or walk, and I lost complete vision. Today, I'm honored to be here, to be able to walk into this room and also be able to talk to all of you, something we did not know was going to be accomplished. So for anybody that goes through anything in life, continue to believe. Don't give up. What I'm here today, there's one thing that we sometimes forget in our lifetime is bring humanity to ourselves and to others in the community to understand what disability can be and what it is, so that we have those conversations that begin to ask questions of who we are and what place that we have in our community, that there is inclusion and belonging, no matter who you are, and the equity and equality that we all need in our lifetime. And this is where I'm hoping that we can bring back humanity to our lifetime. And remember to give yourself grace, no matter what you're going through. 5 steps forward, 7 steps back. I was able to learn that 7 steps back offered me that next chance to walk 7 steps forward. And this is where I've learned in my own life that we can, we will, and we're able to. I was told so often, Jody, you can't, you won't, and you're not able. I'm sitting here today alive and well. And I cannot pass today without mentioning many of us, millions are now on Medicaid. That fear that we live with, of all of that ending, cast upon us that we are the reason and the fault of this happening. We are not. We are still in need. So to remember, it is not our fault that we are disabled or ill or injured. We are just trying to do our best. And I thank all of you to be willing, patient, and able to be present in life, to be willing to learn. And I thank you. Thank you to my panelists. I'm going to pass it on to Peggy.
Great. Thank you, everyone. My name is Peggy Ochoa Martin, and I'm very honored to be on this panel. I am actually the parent of a person with a disability and a sibling of a person who has since been deceased. So that is my experience with disability. I grew up with a sister. My mother had German measles in her pregnancy, and my sister was disabled. And then when I became a parent, my firstborn daughter was born with the disability. The first words I heard in the delivery room were call the pediatrician. Those are not words that you want to hear in the delivery room. My daughter, Allie, is done well over the years. She is now currently 41 years old. And she is living in a home with two other young women who have disabilities. I say young because I am not very young. I should have said that at the beginning. I'm a white woman and I'm on the older end of the spectrum of age. But my daughter is 41 and lives with two other ladies in her house. We kind of took a different path. In terms of her living situation. At the time, we were looking for places for her to move to. There weren't a lot of availability, as there really isn't a whole lot right now either. But at that time, it was really a crunch. So social workers brought us together and asked us to sort of think creatively about, what we might want to do in terms of living situations. So we ended up meeting another family at that gathering and decided to purchase a house together with another family and then hire an agency to come in and staff that house. And we did that with the purpose of making sure that our daughter had a place to live even after we would be gone, that there wouldn't be any question about that. So, and as I said, she is there. She is doing well, and she lives in town, and so we are still able to support her. I'm just grateful to be here because all of this lived experience is, I learned from that. And one of the things I would say as a parent, and I know we're going to talk about some of these things more, is that I think people who have the disability and live with that have so much if we're just open and willing to hear what they have to say. And on the flip side of that, parents also have a lot to say about where we've been in terms of disabilities and how things have changed over the years. And I just really look forward to having a partnership and with people, with all the people that work with people with disabilities going forward. So that's all I'll say for now.
Alrighty, thank you. So my name is Lexi. I'm going to do a visual description, and for anyone that's wondering why we're doing this, it's for people to have a mental image of what we look like for people that either have low vision or blindness. So I'm a white woman with about shoulder length brown hair. I use a wheelchair, and it has a bunch of stickers on the side of it, and I've pretty much decorated it to match my personality. And I am wearing a gray t-shirt with some jeans and white shoes. I'm in my mid-20s. So a little bit about me. I grew up sick. That's basically the only thing that I really remember about my childhood is constantly being in the hospital, constantly going to doctor's appointments. By the time I was 8 years old, I had been hospitalized in every single room on the pediatric intensive care unit to where on hospitalizations, I would try to request my favorite room, which was the one that had the big, beautiful window. And the problem was that no one knew what my diagnosis was. So this entire time I was going to the hospital having all of these symptoms, no one knew what was essentially wrong with me. And I wouldn't get a diagnosis until I was 17, which you can imagine how difficult that was to know that my body is not behaving the way that it should be, and I'm struggling with all of these things that I technically shouldn't be struggling with, but I have no name for it. I have no reason behind it. I don't know what's going on. You can also imagine trying to go to the doctors and trying to convince them that, yes, something's wrong with me. I'm not lying. I'm not exaggerating. I'm not crazy, is what they would say, or that I need to see a psychiatrist, whatever. So when I was 17 years old, we finally figured out that I actually had a rare genetic disease. And with that disease, I ended up getting a bunch of other ones because there's a lot of comorbidities that come along with the condition that I have. So once I had that diagnosis, I thought, this is great. I finally know the name for it. I can finally, get treatment. Problem is, it's a rare disease. So there's not a lot of research on it. There's not a lot of treatment. There's no cure for it. And there's not a whole lot of symptom management for it as well. Some of the main things that I struggle with as a result of my diagnosis is I frequently get injured, whether it's sprains, dislocations, skin tearing. I have a lot of chronic pain, have issues with all of my organs because my genetic condition is essentially my collagen in my body is genetically mutated, faulty. And so all of your organs are made of collagen and connective tissues. So, for example, I have a lot of issues with my heart as well. So I'd be having all of these issues, and there really wasn't any medication to help me. So what I did was I would just stay home every day because it was too dangerous for me to go out and potentially risk passing out on the sidewalk and cracking my head open, or going to school and trying to walk, to my classes and then getting a dislocation. And so it was just safer for me to stay home. And during that time, I really struggled with social isolation because one, I didn't know whether to call myself disabled or not. I didn't know if I was disabled enough because I did struggle a lot with, the way that our society has placed disability in a bucket that's inherently negative. I didn't really know what it meant to be disabled. And I remember I really struggled with the social isolation and the mental aspects of it. So, one way that I coped was just speaking about my experience, sharing what I was going through, and hoping that someone else either would agree or could sympathize with it. And I started doing public speaking for organizations that had helped me, like the Ronald McDonald House. I stayed there a lot during my treatment, and I would do public speaking for them, for the Make-A-Wish Foundation. And so I started building these public speaking skills, and I thought, this is so cool. This is something I'd love to do, but could this really be a job? I don't know how I would do it. I don't think I could work a 9 to 5 because of my disability. It just wouldn't be accessible. So I started going to college, and I just took gen eds because I didn't know what else to do. I didn't know what I even wanted to go to school for. And then I started just digging more into the history of disability rights. And I was naive at the beginning of becoming disabled and thinking that protections like Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act or the Americans with Disabilities Act would cover everything that I need to be covered, and know that I had those protections. The fact of the matter is, there's a lot of predatory policies against people with disabilities. For example, I cannot have more than $2,000 in my bank account without my benefits being at risk of being taken away. I cannot get married without having my benefits being taken away. I could technically go get a job and be paid sub-minimum wage because I have a disability. That is legal. And also in Minnesota, we have the highest per capita of these 14C certificates, which allow businesses to pay people with disabilities sub-minimum wage. So when I started learning about all of these things that I thought should have already been taken care of, I started really delving more into focusing my time on disability advocacy. And then I thought, well, I want to go to school for social work because I feel like that would be the degree that makes the most sense for what I want to do. And I started getting involved with disability rights organizations, and I started connecting with other people that had disabilities as well. So right now I'm the co-chair for the ARC Minnesota's Regional Quality Council on Disability for the Southeast region, where I also sit and serve on the housing work group, on the transportation work group, a few other work groups as well. And we're essentially trying to protect and promote the rights of people with disabilities. I started really getting involved in legislative advocacy as well. So Madeline and I have actually taken a few trips, going to different places advocating. Our favorite would probably be Rare Disease Week in Washington, D.C., which she can speak more on that. But all that I'm trying to say is that when we first become disabled, a lot of people think we finally have a diagnosis, you know what's wrong. This should be, the end of the story. It's not, it's really just the beginning. And once you become disabled and become aware of all the inequities and systemic ableism that we face in our society, it's only the beginning. And you can not take those glasses off. As soon as you start to see all the ways that our society is structurally built to exclude people with disabilities, you can't take those glasses off. You'll see it like that forever. And so essentially, I'm just trying to share the hidden struggles that people with disabilities face, especially with the psychosocial manifestations. So, with that being said, I will pass it off to Madeline.
Hello, everyone. I am Madeline Sainer. I am a white woman with brown hair up in a ponytail. I'm wearing a white sweater with like brown and white and black floral jumpsuit. So yeah, I became disabled when I was about 11. I growing up, my parents called me their healthiest child. I would run around. I would play outside all day, every day. Um, and all of a sudden, when I was 11, I developed this condition called postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, also called POTS. And my life changed in a split second. So when my health started deteriorating from that point on. By seventh grade, I was doing half days at school. By eighth grade, I had to drop out of school. By 10th grade, I was too sick to even do online school, so I never graduated high school. I just got my GED last year, which took a lot of work, especially as a disabled person. So I deal a lot with um, mobility issues, so that's why I use a wheelchair. I struggle with being upright for long periods of time, walking around for long periods of time because I have chronic pain and that can really worsen it. Um, I struggle with a lot of brain fog, so that might happen during this. Is my brain doesn't always function correctly, and I can't always think clearly. So I lose my train of thought frequently. Um, so yeah, I for about from like age 11 to age 14, um, I kept having doctors tell me to not use a wheelchair, and that continued through my teenage years. And I've even had doctors take my wheelchair away from me, saying that if I was doing my treatments correctly, I wouldn't need it. And that really traumatized me and pushed me away from using a mobility aid when I really, really needed it. Um, so I dealt with a lot of internalized ableism that was also perpetuated then by the medical community. Um, so when I was 17, I finally decided that I was just going to use a wheelchair. I don't care what my doctor said. Um, and from then on, I've been able to gain more strength. I started doing some chronic illness and disability advocacy online, and started working with doing stuff federally as well. Like we went to Rare Disease Week and got to talk with some legislators about different issues affecting the rare disease community. I was going to say something else. I can't remember what. Oh yes, I am now a student at University of Minnesota Rochester. I have to do it part time because I cannot handle being a full time student. I'm also on disability, and managing that and being in school is a very tricky situation. Um, and I'm also on the disability
the disability not panel, but the disability panel for the University of Minnesota. So I give them information about kind of what's happening on the disability community on campus, how they could help, and ways, different ways for them to help us. So yeah, I think that's it. Thank you. All right, so I know that that was a lot of information for all of us to share. So again, I just want to thank the vulnerability of all of our panelists that are here today. So something I think that we can all kind of share our experience on is how internalized ableism shows up in our everyday lives, whether that's coming to terms with the fact that you have a disability or explaining to people that you have a disability. So I'd like to talk a little bit about internalized ableism. Peggy, would you be able to start a little bit about that?
Sure. So I think one of the things that I neglected to mention about myself is I consider an advocate, not just a parent, but an advocate. And that is probably my major job right now. And one of the things that I do is I talk to teachers, I've talked to other parents about their life experience, their situations. And one of the things that does always come up is ableism. We didn't always call it that in my lifetime, but we knew that that's what it was. And so when we think of ableism, some of the things that I think about is, and the panel has talked about this already, but it's really having people not patronize you. It's really having people treat you like they would treat any other person. Um, we're not exceptional because I'm not exceptional because I'm a parent of a daughter with a disability. Somebody who has a disability isn't exceptional. And just because they have the disability, that comes off a little patronizing. So everybody likes to feel special and everybody likes to do something well. And if people do that well, then tell them they do that thing well. But they're not exceptional just because they have a disability or because they're a parent of a person with a disability. The other thing that I think about in my experience with my daughter is how people approach her or how they talk to her. If you've ever noticed, sometimes people will talk louder when they're talking to someone with a disability, that you don't necessarily need to be talking louder to the person. Or they will talk to the person, quite honestly, and I think probably all of us have experienced this, like they were a child. The being treated as you were a 5-year-old when you're a 40-year-old or a 20-year-old or whatever the case is. So it's really doing, I think, looking at ableism is doing that mental sort of check about how we treat other people, how, and Jody has mentioned this. It's really about the relationship. So if you would talk to somebody else as an adult in that way, then start out that conversation that way. People can cue you into what they need, but let them do that. Don't assume that they need you to talk to them as a 5-year-old or that you need to refer to them as exceptional when they don't feel that way. So I guess those are just a couple of things. I'll let somebody else.
Thank you, Peggy. So often in society, we are defined by the disability rather than a name that somebody approaches you and says, hello, Jody. Of course, the medical model, we go into the clinic and the doctors are focusing on your diagnosis. But in society, if we can start working in the community and actually see us as an individual and we ourselves not to define ourselves by that disability itself. And I will lead with Peggy in the comment. So often people think that because I'm legally blind, I have a brain injury and balance issues. Oh, we must help her. So they grab at my white cane or my other cane and lead me across the street, which is so very dangerous because if gravity and I are friends, apparently, I don't need to go down again. So just to be aware of helping is asking as well. And that mutual respect that you yourself as an individual would want. Just that communication that we can have. Don't be scared of the disability. You know, talk to us, ask us questions. We are more than willing. But as Lexi said, if we're out in the public, you know, be conscientious of what you might be asking and where it might be. And I'm going to lead into the vulnerability. Vulnerability can be an indication of strength. Vulnerability is how I've worked through all of this because being willing to be vulnerable and sharing your story is how we get to know ourselves in this place right now. Because our lives have changed drastically, mine, of course, but I'm learning more about myself and my space and creating that sense of peace of where I am. And I will pass it on to Miss Shelley. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jody. Lexi had asked about internalized ableism. I want to go back in my story just a bit to when I first found out I had brain tumors. I was in the hospital and the emergency doctor came back and whipped the curtain open and said, "We found something." And I thought immediately, "Great, get rid of it. I want to go home." And that's when she said, "Your brain is bleeding. You're going to need emergency surgery." And all crap broke loose. So that was the last time I felt in control of my life. Since then, people have made decisions for me. I remember being in brain rehab. So I have two separate kind of stories that collide. One was finding out I had a disability 8 years later. The brain tumor in my brainstem blew and I had to have surgery. And that's what caused a lot of my disability. So fast forward to the hospital from the brain tumor being removed. I was grateful a doctor could operate on the brainstem, but I was so close to death that I realized when I woke up, I was grateful to be alive. But people were making a lot of decisions for me. And I kept saying, "I just want to go home. It's going to be the hardest part. The hardest part of my journey will be getting used to what I can do now." And people still wouldn't let me go home. So when I finally did go home, I wanted really to go back to work. And I talked to my voc rehab person, and she said, "Well, I think maybe it would be best if you volunteered 1 day a month." And I thought, 1 day a month? That's ridiculous. I could do a lot more than that. Whether she was right or not, I don't know, but I really did value productivity. And that's part of ableism is valuing the amount that a person without a disability is able to produce, or valuing a non-disabled person over a disabled person. And so I internalized that and I thought I was never going to amount to anything because I had a disability. I would never do anything again. I, like Peggy, failed to say when I introduced myself, I do a lot of activism and advocacy. Um, I've written a book which really was outside the box for me. I thought never could I write again because I can't use a pen. My right side of my body was completely paralyzed during surgery, so I have hemoptysis. But um, a lot of things I thought I could never do again. I'm able to do with time and grace, as Jody was saying. So with that, I'll pass it on.
Alrighty, so a little bit about internalized ableism. I just want to make a note that it's not necessarily your fault that you have internalized ableism because it is the way that our society is structured. On TV, we don't see a whole lot of people that have disabilities. In books, something that people find very shocking is we know 25% or more of the population has a disability, but less than 2% of characters, main characters in books, have disabilities. So, of course, if we're not seeing the representation, we don't know how to treat them. Another thing, too, is um, many times when I've gone to the grocery store and I'm in my wheelchair, there will be a little kid that's, very curious. Oh, maybe it's the stickers, or maybe it's, my wonderful outfit or something that they're staring at me. And their parent will say, don't look at them, just ignore them. And we have to think, what does that actually teach them? That teaches them to ignore people with disabilities, and they're going to grow up and they're going to continue to be absorbing what society is telling us that disability is inherently bad, and they're just going to increase that ableism in ways that are maybe less subtle and more overt. And this became really apparent to me when I was doing advocacy for one of the bills I was trying to get passed was called the Educators Awareness on Ableism Bill. And essentially, what this bill does is when teachers go to renew their teaching license, they have to take a specific number of credits in diversity. And so we were trying to advocate to get a course built that would talk about ableism, disability rights, and disability justice so that they could then better interact with students that have disabilities. And I remember calling up my mom and telling her what I was doing and that I was going to the Capitol soon to advocate for this bill. And I really wanted to make a testimony that was very, very powerful by telling my lived experience. But because oftentimes with things that are traumatic, your brain kind of blocks it out. So I talked to my mom and I was like, do you remember any ways that maybe my teachers were ableist towards me? And I just don't really remember it. And we had a 3 hour conversation on the phone, just going over all the different ways. And I kind of narrowed it down to 2 categories, which was subtle ableism, maybe things that we think are well intentioned, but just are ableist. Like, you're too young to be disabled. I've had people tell me, which I appreciate this, but I don't like the way it's said, you're too pretty. Like, go live your life. And I'm like, I said I was disabled, not ugly. Like, there's a difference. And she started telling me that when I didn't have my diagnosis at the time, because like I said, I had a rare disease and was searching for that diagnosis for a long time, they would tell me that if she's not sick enough to have a diagnosis, then she doesn't meet the accommodations. And my mom, like many moms of people with disabilities, fought tooth and nail to get me the accommodations that I needed. And like I said, I really struggled with the emotional aspect of living with a disability, so much to the point where I actually started struggling with self harm and suicidal ideation. So I got moved to a school that was specifically for people with disabilities. And I remember when I started this school, I am very well when it comes to learning and education. My grades have always been A's, even now in college. And I remember I was in 6th grade and they started giving me worksheets on addition and subtraction. And I go up to the teacher, I said, what is this? Why am I learning this? Like, where's PEMDAS? Like we all learned that in algebra. And she goes, well, since you're at a school for people with disabilities, no matter your grade level, we have to dumb down the curriculum. And I remember thinking, what did this lady just say to me? I was shocked. And, that's of course more of that overt ableism. But she truly thought in her brain that because I was disabled automatically, that I would need lower curriculum, which is so not the case. Another thing, too, is that when it comes to subtle ableism, it's usually based off of the assumptions, the internal assumptions that we have about people with disabilities. And I'm very independent. I've traveled all across the country by myself. I've lived by myself since I was 17. Like, I just, I take life and I make it the best of it. And I remember even when I was younger, I was still very independent. And my teacher would tell me, Lexi, you cannot come on the class field trip unless you bring a nurse. And I was like, I don't need a nurse. I take care of all my stuff. I know how to administer all my medications, everything. I don't need a nurse. And she goes, well, if you have a disability, you're going to need to bring your home nurse. And I said, I don't even have a home nurse. But she just had that assumption that I would need one. So it actually got to the point where my mom and the school were fighting to try to allow me to go on the field trip. And what they came to was that I could not go on the field trip unless my mom came with me. I didn't need my mom to come with me, just like every other student that came with. But they made that assumption, and unfortunately, the only way for me to be allowed on that field trip was to then succumb to their disgusting assumptions about my disability. So we just made do with what we had. And oftentimes, that's the story with ableism is that we get so tired of constantly having to advocate for our needs that sometimes we just lean into it. There's such thing as advocacy fatigue. And I feel like with what Jody was saying with the Medicaid cuts, sometimes it gets so exhausting from having to advocate for the fact that we are still humans, whether we're disabled or not. Everyone in this room, even if you are not currently disabled, you will be disabled at some point in your life. That is a fact. Period. Full stop. That is a fact. And so just thinking about the fact that ableism is so prevalent in our community, why don't we try to create a empowering and inclusive future? So with that being said, I want to pass it off to Madeline to speak a little bit about internalized ableism.
Yeah, so I talked about it a little bit in my introduction, but I really dealt with internalized ableism from when I first became disabled at age 11 to about age 17. During those 6 years, I never once called myself disabled. I did not consider myself disabled. I didn't even think that was on my radar, even though there were days I couldn't walk, there were days I couldn't eat, there were days I couldn't leave the house. I was like, I'm not disabled. Like I can't be. Because of this kind of societal uh, narrative that's been put in place that people with disabilities are less than, or they look a certain way, they act a certain way, they're not as smart, which like I was a straight A student, I was in GATE classes, I was considered gifted. So I was like, I can't be disabled. When that's just not the truth. That's not how the world works. People with disabilities, we are all across the spectrum. We have all different kinds of disabilities. We all struggle in different ways. Like Lexi was talking about schooling. When I first got sick at school, we had to literally bring in my therapist and tell the school that no, I have an actual diagnosis. I have an actual health condition that makes me need accommodations. I need an elevator pass because my middle school was 4 floors and I couldn't do stairs. And we had to bring in my therapist for them to actually accept the fact that I had a real disability. It wasn't just anxiety. So along with that, kind of experience from school, the experiences that I had with doctors, I really pushed this idea in my brain that I couldn't be disabled because, like, people who are disabled are a certain way, um, in a negative way. That's kind of what is often thought. So when I was 17, I finally found other people online who had the same condition as me, who also used a wheelchair, and they called themselves disabled. And they weren't like ashamed of it. It was just a fact. And it helped me kind of realize that disability isn't a bad thing. It just makes life harder in some ways. But I feel like it's also added so much to my story. Yeah, it sucks sometimes, and yeah, I get really frustrated that I like can't do certain things. But I think we all get frustrated like that, no matter if you have a disability or not. Like some people can't sing and like, sorry about that. Can't help you there. So I, we all just struggle in different ways. This is just my struggle. And I'm like really proud of the fact that I go around with my wheelchair. I'm an ambulatory wheelchair user, so I will sometimes get up and walk around. I used to be really scared of doing that in front of people because people will be like, "Oh, you're faking it." Now I'm a lot more confident and just like that's just my how my disability works. I don't care what anyone else thinks. Um, yeah, so it took many years for that kind of shift in my brain, but now I'm a disability advocate, and it's like I call myself that, and I'm proud of it. And I think that's really cool. Yeah, so pass it back off to Lexi.
Can I just say one thing I wanted to follow up with Madeline, because I thought that was just a really salient point, is that ableism is about making people other and less than. And you really hit the nail on the head. That is what we're really trying to get rid of. We are not other, not to be pitied, not to be looked less than. And that's what ableism is. If you're really thinking, so I do this with myself and I try to talk to other people about doing this, do just a body check. Just do a check. Are you talking to the person you're talking to? And by what you're saying, what you're doing, how you're acting, are you making that person feel less than? That's ableism.
Something that I want to talk a little bit on the flip side is talking about how our support systems really help us in our lives, what they are, as well as what do allies look like, and what do they not look like. So I will start with Peggy. Put you in the hot seat.
Yeah, exactly. So I would just say for me, relationships and a support system are crucial. They are everything. And I'm saying that as a parent of a person with a disability, and I'll let the people who have lived experience speak for themselves about that. But we don't survive alone. Nobody survives alone. It's all about, for me, life is all about relationships. And it's about your ability to reach out and how you can love others and how you can accept others for who they are. And the way that you do that, again, is not by patronizing, not by making people less than. It's by thinking about how you can support someone, how you can be their ally. Not take over for them, not do for them, but how can you support them? Just as you would like to be supported. We all need support. I need support. Friends need support. Everybody needs support. But it's about checking in as an ally with a person who has a disability and building that relationship just as you'd build a relationship with anybody else, and finding out how you can support them. What is that person like? What is that person not like? How do they like, they don't, Jody's saying, she doesn't want to be helped across the street. Okay, that's not being a good ally by helping her across the street. So what could you could help Jody with or support Jody with her disability? But sometimes that takes conversation. Sometimes that takes trust, and that takes building a relationship. And herein lies some of the problem. Sometimes we're afraid of people with disabilities, and we don't engage in that conversation with them about what they really need and what they really want. And that's where it's just crucial to just develop and build relationships and get the support that we need. Heaven knows I've needed support over the years, and as I'm listening to Lexi talk about her mom, it's almost sending little thinking about all those conversations I've had trying to understand. And that would be the other thing. I really feel that it's just really important to try to step inside somebody else's shoes. You have this mindset, you have this strong feeling about the way things should be. but try to take a step outside of that and try to get in the mind of somebody else and understand what it's like for them.
Perfect. Jody, do you want to share a little bit about what an ally looks like to you and what they don't look like?
Yes, thank you. The one thing that comes to mind with allies, and I've said this before in other venues, the one thing that we all have in common is if you put your hand to your heart and looked around the room and listened to that heartbeat, listen carefully, and then look around the room once again, we all share that commonality, if anything. All of us, not just here in Rochester, but in communities outside of here. If ever to doubt that you have a connection to each other, is that heartbeat that we are connected. You may not understand exactly what a disability is, but to be an ally, recognize there is something we are connected by. And that's where that humanity piece comes in. We may not be so different from each other, but to recognize if ever you doubt that you are connected to somebody, put your hand to your heart and listen carefully. And I know those people that have heard this story before, I know you're out there listening to your pulse, that heartbeat, and sharing and passing it forward. That's what an ally can be, is to listen carefully, that we are all interconnected one way or another. And I'll pass it on to Miss Shelley. Thank you so much.
Same question.
Yep.
All right, so just real quick, I want to say that it takes part of the allyship is the person with a disability has to be accepting of help, which I wasn't for a long time. So it has to be something where it's reciprocated, and I, as a disabled person, need to be a good ally too. So even people with disabilities aren't a monolith. And so there are many ways that we also can be great allies. But when I think of allyship, I think of accompaniment theory, which is journeying alongside the person and not deciding for them. And I'll pass it on with that.
All right, we'll go to Madeline, and then after that, we'll open it up to some questions.
I think the main thing for me when I think about being an ally with a disability is asking and respecting. So often people will ask me a question, I will say, no, I don't need help, or like I'll answer it, and then they'll do it anyway. And that is so frustrating, especially as someone in a wheelchair. People will just push me without my consent, which anyone who uses a mobility aid or like a cane, a walker, even a service animal, those things are extensions of our body. So if you touch them, it's like you're touching our bodies. And that's kind of gross, to say the least. So asking and respecting what a disabled person says, it's so simple. And just like how you would ask and respect anyone else's decision. So yeah, I think that's just the main concept for me that I think an ally means.
Alrighty, so we'll go ahead and pass a microphone around the audience if we have any questions.
There is a question from the chat.
Okay.
Oh. So we do have a question from the chat from Amanda Pelly. One thing I've become more aware of in recent years is common forms of language that are actually considered to be ableist. Because of that, I've learned to be very mindful of how I use language. However, when I hear others using some of that language, though, it bothers me. I don't always know the best way to address it. If it's someone I'm talking with one-on-one, it's easy to say something, but in a meeting or professional setting, it can be harder. Any advice on some ideas on how to call people in versus calling them out when it comes to their language?
That's a great question, and I think that's probably something that in today's society we can all relate to. I think that newer terms have started to rise, like, let's see, we have special needs, we have Do you have any other ones I know? Differently abled, that's one that I hate. Just say disabled, it's not a swear word. And if you're in a meeting or in a group setting with other people and they start to say words, that are definitely outdated, you could just say, oh, I prefer to use the word disabled because differently abled can kind of make disability seem like it's a swear word or a bad thing when it's just a part of the human experience. And then I might even say something like, but that's up to you. So just kind of saying it casually, but then if they continue to still say it, especially in a professional setting, you could even pull them aside and just say, hey, I noticed that you keep saying like special needs or differently abled. Can I ask you why do you say that? Or like, are you open to using other terms? So do we have any other questions, either from the chat or in person? I see we have one in person. We'll get you a microphone.
Okay, so this is I guess a question I can say we because I'm legally blind and I feel like we are simultaneously living in a time where we have the most we have a lot of people who are in the internet space kind of being advocates, being a voice, and at the same time on some of those very same sites, places, you have some of the most backwards, offensive, etc. ways of thinking that those are what permeate professional environments, workplaces. So I don't know who in particular I'm asking this to, but how do you kind of rectify the fact that we are kind of at the best of times and the worst of times, and you are in the middle constantly, whether you want to be or not. I've had days where someone ask me a question about my disability, and I'm like, dude, I'm not here for it today. But I have to. Because if I don't in that moment, I am now responsible for someone going, wow, that disabled guy was a jerk. So how do you kind of deal with and work through the fact that whether you want to be or not, you're always in that middle space?
Yeah, I can definitely empathize with what you're saying. I think with the rise of social media, like you said, there's people who have started advocating online, I was talking to Jody about this with YouTube. There's a bunch of different YouTubers that we both enjoy. And she was telling me, oh, Lexi, I've watched your YouTube videos. And I was like, oh, thank you. So just creating a space where you share the hidden struggles is really important. But then, of course, being online, sharing those struggles, you're going to have people that, leave rude comments because it's a lot easier to say trash when you're behind a screen rather than in person. Not saying that people don't say it in person because believe me, they do. But I think one great example that we've seen with this is that I feel in our communities, we've learned a lot about diabetes. For example, type 1 diabetes, we've started to hear a lot more about what it's like to live with that. And recently they came out with a Barbie that has type 1 diabetes who uses a insulin pump and has a continuous glucose monitor on. And I saw some of the comments on that post were things like she's too skinny to have diabetes, or why doesn't she come with a bowl of chocolate or something, just like really rude things. And I don't necessarily see those same comments being said in person, but it's a lot easier to say it behind a screen. But to your question, it's definitely difficult to walk the line because I know that there is a stereotype out there of the angry disabled person. That is a stereotype that, I'm going to sue you for not meeting my rights or whatever, that we have to be careful of not necessarily crossing that line, but then also advocating for ourselves in a way that makes an impact. And that can be a really difficult line to walk. And Jody?
Yes. Thank you so much. I really appreciate this question. Thank you so much. I was going through times where in my recovery, I thought I owe everybody an explanation. And I came to a space that no, as disabled individuals, we don't owe our life to everybody as anybody else. You don't owe an answer. So to give yourself grace and take a step back. You don't owe somebody an answer. If you're not there in that space, I would say create and protect your peace. If it's not in that moment that you want to answer to somebody, then don't. We give a lot of ourselves away because society has created this imagery that disabled individuals must answer to us so they feel better about themselves. We don't need to. Start protecting you and create that space that you feel in place with yourself. And thank you so much. I really appreciate that question.
Oh, yes. I just want to add that I say, oh, I'm sorry. I'm not your living, breathing, teachable moment.
All right, we'll open it up to another virtual question if we have one.
No questions. We do have a comment from Senator Liz Bolden saying, Senator Liz Bolden just shared in the chat. It's been an excellent conversation. Many thanks to all the panelists and everyone who organized this opportunity.
Oh, thank you. We love Liz Bolden. She's such a great ally for disability rights. Let's go ahead and open it up to questions that we have from the audience. No question is a bad question, I promise. Alrighty, I guess with that being said, that this concludes our panel. I know that I want to be mindful of our time. I know that it ends at 1 o'clock. So if we have any last minute comments that any of the panelists want to share, now would be the time.
Yes, I would like to thank ABC
Yeah.
for being the host for us today. We really are grateful for this opportunity that you invited into your home, your space of individuals that really know what it is to work with individuals with disabilities, giving them the opportunity as place in this community. We don't always have those spaces, and thank you to ABC for creating that. Thank you so much.
I would just like to say thank you to everybody for coming and thank you for taking the time. I can't tell you how important it is that people are willing and interested to have this conversation about disabilities and how people want and need to be treated. So I think it's just really important to keep the conversation going. And the last thing that I would say is if you see my daughter, treat her like a potential friend, treat her like a potential neighbor.
Yeah.
And just treat her that way and go from there. Just try to build a relationship because again, it's just all about relationships. Again, don't other people, don't make them less than, treat them as you would want to be treated.
One thing that's really sticking out in my brain is there was a awareness video about Down syndrome that was circulating earlier this year, and one of the phrases from that video was assume that I can, so maybe I will. And I think when you have that assumption that they're going to need help or they can't do that because it's not accessible, well, they're not going to do it because you're assuming that they can't. So I think any situation is what I like to say figure outable. With my friends, if we're going out somewhere to eat and it's not accessible, we'll find a different restaurant. Like it's not that big of a deal. We'll make it work. So with that being said, just have that assumption that they are capable, even if they, just because that they have a disability, it doesn't automatically exclude them from being able to do something. Any other comments?
Lexi, thank you. Could you share a little bit about the upcoming events?
Absolutely. So we have one more of the Disability Information Summits that will be focusing on what happens next in community conversations. We'll have some elected officials as well as people that are making change within our communities. That will be happening on the 23rd. It will happen at Rochester Community and Technical College. It will be again from 12 to 1. And then also on July 26th, we'll be having our Disability Pride celebration, which I am so excited about. That will be from 4 to 8 p.m. And that will be at Boundless Activity Center and Play Space in Rochester, Minnesota. We'll have live music, we'll have food, we'll have disability rights organizations and resources there. We'll also have a art market that's ran by disabled artists, myself included, so I hope to see all of you there. And I'm really excited. I feel like Rochester is a town that we need to hold ourselves to a higher level of accessibility, considering that we have Mayo Clinic and a lot of people relocate here. I know Shelley's relocated here for medical treatment, myself included, that we need to hold ourselves to a higher standard. So having a disability pride celebration for Rochester is something that's long overdue, but I'm excited for it and I hope to see everyone there.
Awesome, thank you so much. This concludes the seventh session of the summit. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.